would like to give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation. Mr. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Distinguished Chair, dear colleagues, today the UN Open-Ended Working Group on International Information Security gets down to its substantive discussions for the first time. I would like to express special gratitude to the UN Office for Disarmament Affairs and personally to Under-Secretary General and High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, Ms. Izumi Nakamitsu, for her contribution to the work of this important mechanism, to her wisdom and willingness to assist states in every way possible. I would like to share with you the Russian side's view of the main substantive and tactical issues of the work of our group. Firstly, the strategic line set out in my instructions is to do our best to facilitate the restoration of consensus on international information security in the UN. The situation in this field is rapidly deteriorating. If we disregard the wrappings of propaganda, it is clear that cyber confrontation is on the rise. And if we, through joint efforts, fail to find effective ways to fight these threats, then, I'll be blunt, global cyber war will be just down the road. We are therefore open for dialogue with all states and groups of states, and we believe that our collective work should be structured in the most efficient way. We should not try to change each other's political stance, but rather fulfill our diplomatic duty and agree on how we should collectively exist in the information space. Secondly, along the lines of our strategy, we are fully supportive of the Chair's policy, which suggests that all states should have a chance to deliver a statement on international information security. We agree that this substantive session will be devoted to states' presentation of their political positions and concrete proposals. This is what constitutes the chief distinction of our open-ended working group, that is to say, its status, and this is the feature that distinguishes it from the group of governmental experts. Thirdly, at the same time, the world will judge our work by its concrete result in the form of the report of the open-ended working group to the General Assembly and the Secretary-General, rather than by words. We have very little time to produce this report. In fact, we have 2 sessions in February and July. In other words, formally we have 10 working days. Hence the need for intense diplomatic work in the intersessional period. The main thing is that we should work on the concrete draft report itself. The sooner it is presented, preferably even before November, the higher our chances for success will be, because then we would be able to scrutinize the draft, introduce the necessary amendments to it, and even possibly agree on them among ourselves, and at the February session of the open-ended working group, then polish and finalize our joint report. We can considerably support the Chair by providing concrete rather than ideological formulas and suggesting exhaustive, polished language that would allow the Chair, his consultants and the Secretary of the group to take our suggestions into account when drafting the report. And the last point I would like to mention here is that we have neither teachers nor students in this room. We all enjoy sovereign equality. Every country is perfectly aware of its stance, so we do not need to be lectured by anybody. Fourth, at the previous UN General Assembly session, there was a danger that the UN discussion process on international information security could break down and that all talks would become regional. Fortunately, we managed to agree on not only one, but on 2 negotiating mechanisms, the open-ended working group and the group of governmental experts. For Russia, as a country that previously initiated the creation of the group of governmental experts, both groups are of fundamental importance. Thus, the negotiation process can be intensified and diversified, or, to put it in simpler terms, can allow us to find ways of ensuring international information security more efficiently. But it is also important to understand that the status of these two groups is, of course, different. In the open-ended working group, the responsibility rests with governments, and it is they who can and must agree amongst themselves. The group of governmental experts has a very important but a different status as an expert platform according to the UN's rules and procedures. Both groups are two independent mechanisms which should operate in parallel. They should not rival or substitute one another, but rather, on the contrary, they should be mutually reinforcing. From our perspective, such an effect can be achieved by a certain degree of specialization between the two groups, although, judging by their almost identical mandates, they are entitled to discuss the full array of topics relating to international information security. Fifthly, in the opinion of the Russian Federation, the open-ended working group should concentrate on such important topics as rules and norms of responsible behavior of states in information space and digital capacity building, meaning assisting developing countries in bridging the digital divide, and also should focus on a thorough analysis of threats in the digital field, which, with every passing year, are changing. We agree that the open-ended working group is not starting from scratch. It should rely on the existing positive experience of the 2010, 2013 and 2015 GGE reports, as well as the respective UN General Assembly resolutions, and also useful regional practices achieved in the OSCE, the SCO, the BRICS, the ASEAN Regional Forum on Security, the African Union, and others. As I see it, we should take the first and most important step, which will allow us to universalize, under the auspices of the UN, the agreements, compromises, and recommendations that have already been achieved, and, if possible, to complement them with new ones. In this context, we should not be trying to produce the longest report possible. On the precedent of the OSCE, in which I happen to take part personally, we managed to develop a consensus report which was based on a compromise approach and not on attempts of individual states to overburden the chair with radical and biased proposals. To sum up, our challenge is to get the discussions back on the rails of consensus and to ensure a successful outcome of this truly historic forum under the auspices of the United Nations. Unfortunately, I cannot end my statement on such an optimistic note. I have to publicly, within the UN family, touch upon an uncomfortable topic that is unfortunately becoming political. In the UN process, all states are equal and sovereign. It is up to them and only them to determine the composition of their delegations at negotiations organized under UN auspices. However, recently, not only Russia, but other countries as well, now on an almost regular basis, on an almost constant basis, are facing a situation where members of our delegations either do not get a visa at all, including for sessions of the open-ended working group, or get them when it is already too late. By doing this, the US are essentially censoring the composition of our negotiating teams and extending visa warfare to the UN. In so doing, they are interfering in the operation of the normal UN diplomatic process. This is a direct violation by the host country of the UN headquarters of its obligations both to the organization and to all the states that make up the UN family. I emphasize, we do not desperately want to visit the US, we are heading to the United Nations. If this practice continues, then Russia, along with other like-minded states, will raise the question of, at least initially, relocating out of the USA all important international negotiations, including, of course, the open-ended working group and the group of governmental experts. That said, I would like to point out that through their visa policies, the US are impeding the work of the UN Secretariat and putting the leadership of our organization in a very ambiguous position. Unfortunately, on this far from optimistic note, I would like to thank you for your attention, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation for his statement.